It's 10 times the terror.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror.
Okay. Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. I'm Gwen.
And I'm Paul.
And on today's episode, Dad, we're going to be talking about, as you were saying, this pseudo based on a real story idea that you had been reading when we were in the summertime, right? What was the book?
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting book called Behind the Horror, True Stories That Inspired Horror Movies, that has a whole list of current horror films. I don't know much about the author, but the book is very interesting, and I don't want to give it away until we have a chance to talk about it. But he does talk about all kinds of current horror films and the real life incidents that inspired them. Put it that way. Ed Gein, for example, especially in both Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So we have when a genuine horror event takes place, more or less, and then that creates a whole franchise, if you will. I mean, we've got, when you look at The Exorcist and Amityville Horror and the Paranormal Activity, I mean, there's like a dozen movies in each of these. I would argue most of them very forgettable, but all claiming to be based on something that really happened. It reminds me, though, of Plan 9 from Outer Space. Can you prove that it didn't happen? So let me just talk a little bit about the Amityville Horror. Well, I'm going to go back there.
Yeah, I'm curious. And that's in Long Island, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep, sure.
Kind of close enough.
The origin of this is a subgenre of the horror film, if you will. Goes back to a really good film, I think, The Blair Witch Project, in the early 1900s, 1990s rather, and it's this premise.
It is the 1900s. I just said that, makes me feel so old.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it is the early 1990s.
That was a great movie.
It is, and it's this idea that you've got a video camera of some kind, and it's been dropped somewhere, and it's recording what is actually happening. There's no human agency, but you're seeing all these terrible things that are a result of this. And so the Blair Witch Project, again, claims to be based on a real legend. So we're talking in the realm of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and these sort of things. But that's the first film that introduces this idea that it's really happening. There really is a witch out there, and you can film it with your video camera. Okay, I mean, there's that famous picture from 1936 of the Loch Ness Monster, and if you can Google that, take a look at it. Everybody keeps saying, "Well, see, that proves there really is a monster there." And Billy Wilder, the great filmmaker, made a huge joke out of this when he did The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, where Holmes investigates and solves the whole question of the Loch Ness Monster. But that's not where we are today. Okay, the Amityville Horror is probably the most famous and notorious of these "it really happened" horror movies kind of thing. And it does begin with a true horrible event, which was on November 13th, 1974, at this house in Amityville. That's addressed since become very, very famous. It's 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. A deranged man named Ronald DeFeo killed 6 family members. All right, so a horrific event, which of course got an enormous amount of attention in the whole New York area. Okay. Well, then the Amityville story properly begins a little over a year later, that a couple named George and Kathy Lutz with 3 children move into the house. And initially they have no knowledge, supposedly, of the terrible event that took place there with this man who killed his family members.
That's probably not something you advertise when you put your for sale sign up, right?
No, right, exactly. And he had a lawyer, who was, I think it was a court-appointed lawyer named William Weber, whose name is important here. Well, the deal here is that shortly after the Lutzes moved into the house, they claimed to hear noises and see things, and ghosts, and all kinds of suggestions that the house is haunted. And they report these things, and supposedly they have everybody they have a priest who comes out to bless the house, but he's having like nightmares the night before, all this sort of stuff that indicates that there's something very, very real and very supernatural that's taking place. George and Kathy and of course then the media loves this. Again, you got to get the picture of this. You got Eyewitness News, you got CBS, you've got all pulling up with their trucks and their reporters to get the story on this haunted house. The Lutzes approach an author approaches them, a man by the name of Jay Anson, to write up all the experiences they were having. And so he's the one who wrote the book, The Amityville Horror, and that was on that book. The film was based on the book and subsequent other films. Okay, now here's the whole big thing. P.T. Barnum and Bailey Circus famously said, "No one ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American public." What it turns out, according to the author here that wrote the book on Behind the Horror, is when the Lutzes found out what had happened in the murder that was the source of the house being haunted, they sat down with the lawyer and they came up with the idea that if they could claim that the house was haunted and was the site of strange and eerie things, they get media attention, they could make a fortune. So they hatched the idea that the house was haunted. And
what the legal team was going to present?
Well, the legal team, it was going to write this up along with them. But according here to this the Lee Mellor book, the whole thing was made up. And what happened is that they started all parties, including the author of the book, Jay Anson, started arguing about who got what, and dividing the thing up. And it finally went into court, and the judge threw it out because he said it's just all based on a work of fiction. So nobody could claim ownership of the idea. All right. So according to him, it's totally made up, and the couple, they kind of decided, rather than going into a haunted house, this was a windfall. They would make a fortune. How would they make a fortune? By selling the rights to their story, by doing interviews and articles, and it's almost a cottage industry that shows up about this. Well, that's not the only example. There's Paranormal Activity, which was produced by Orrin Pelly. Orrin Pelly, I think, was the producer on that. We saw that years ago, sweetie, and when it first came out, and it was just ridiculous. Any of these films where they claim, well, if you actually had a camera rolling, photography going, you would see that there really were ghosts and spirits and whatever else. Let me throw one other thing in here. Poltergeist, again, a very popular film and so forth that Toby Hooper did with Steven Spielberg's help. Again, in that case, a magician was brought in, and he was able to duplicate all of the alleged happenings. So it was nothing that wasn't already part of a magician's series of tricks and so forth. So anyway, point being, this created a huge franchise. It was a moneymaker. People sued each other over it, but it was big bucks, and it was all completely fake. Now, if you want to say you want to make up a story about a haunted house in Long Island, go ahead. But if you want to claim that it's based on, quote, true events, things that really happen, and the one stark reality is that this Ronald DeFeo really did kill his family members. It was one of the most horrific crimes in the history of Long Island. So that part's true, but only that part's true.
And what part is true of the actual? I mean, the actual family that moved in must have had something, some reason why they didn't want to stay in the house, right? For them,
No. What the argument here is that they when they learned about the murder, and they contacted the lawyer, and supposedly they sat down, and according to the let me just read from this Behind the Horror book. In July 1978, Ronald Butch DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, told the Associated Press he had met the Lutzes soon after they had moved out of the property. Together, they had created this horror story over many bottles of wine.
Wow.
So they in other words, they began to think about, well, what's the background of this? And they kind of sat down and said, if you could claim that this guy was still, his body or his spirit rather, was still haunting, stalking the house, scaring people half to death, you could make a fortune. Imagine what it'd be like to sell tours, right? It's a perfect example of American show business.
Do you think it's common knowledge that this, obviously this guy has written it in this book, but I feel like there's a lot of people that believe stuff like the Amityville Horror happened the way the movie says it happened, or the story says it happened and stuff.
Yeah. One big contradiction is there was an event where they claimed they found footprints in the snow on a New Year's Day that was supposed to be the spirit of Ronald DeFeo. And somebody just pointed out later on, they went back, checked the records. There was no snow in Long Island on that January 1st.
Oh, geez.
So a real obvious faux pas there on trying to. I'm reading from the book here. I think basically that there was no snow on the ground. So, New Year's Day, 1976, there was no snow in Amityville, so you couldn't have seen footprints in the snow. All a made up hoax, And
wow.
Again, if you want to take a terrible event, whether it's this Ronald DeFeo or Jack the Ripper or Ed Gein, and make up a story, okay, go to it. But if you start trying to claim that these alleged supernatural aspects really happened, that people really saw ghosts, or they saw things go flying off of the shelves and smashing into walls and all kinds of stuff like this, so much of this stuff is ordinary sleight of hand magic tricks that have been done for David Copperfield and all that kind of stuff. Been done for generations. Goes back to Henry Houdini, who was the great escape artist and so forth back in the 1920s. And he looked into some of this stuff and then said, it's all made up. It's all a hoax.
But it definitely has become a big thing, because even just on TV, I feel like you have so many of these real ghost, hunter people going to haunted houses and trying to read the energy levels and it's like a major thing.
And they bring people in to do this kind of stuff. They had this all happen, but all the alleged happenings just turn out not to be real. They're all things people said they saw, but there's obviously there's no proof on this. Paranormal activity, you supposedly see this woman being dragged out of bed, dragged across the floor by
which
this.
I thought that was a great scene. There was elements of the movie I thought were really good. I just really hated the ending. It was just such a throwaway.
Well, but it's and again, if it's a classic, it's just a movie, fine, so be
right.
it. But to try to pretend it's something more than that,
right.
but that's the that's a hallmark of the 70s. We've mentioned many times here my favorite horror story being The Hound of the Baskervilles. But that, like some other stories.
Oh, I don't think I knew that. I don't think I ever heard you say that, Dad.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, right. Duh. But that gets filmed, again and again and again. And when you have these, whether it's Frankenstein, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, Hound of the Baskervilles, are the kind of the four fundamental horror stories in the English language. I would want to include the picture of Dorian Gray in there as well. But
yeah,
there's a
story.
1970s made-for-TV film of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Not impressive at all. William Shatner, no less, plays both Sir Hugo and Stapleton. This is
really
after Star Trek. Yeah, it would have been somewhere in the 70s there. But all I'm trying to say is, at the end of that particular film, Stuart Granger, a major actor, plays Holmes. But again, it's really poorly done. But at the end, no. Here's the point. At the end of it, everything's happened. They've rescued the last of the Baskervilles. Stapleton is sunk into the mire. The Hound is shot and dead, and all kind of stuff. At the very end, Watson makes some kind of well, that concludes the case kind of comment, and Holmes agrees. And right when he says that, you hear the howl of the hound.
Oh, geez.
And Watson says, "What's that? What's that?" And Holmes simply replies, "Only the wind, Watson. Only the wind."
Jeez.
This is as far removed from Peter Cushing as you could possibly get. But that was the 1970s, where this stuff flourished.
More nihilistic kind of approach to things.
Well, so called. But again, it's like if you go to the circus, you see all this stuff. You say, "Gee, how were they able to do that?" That's a common response. Well, that's what's going on here. It's like a magician with a sideshow. Is in most of these cases. So it's a genre. It goes back to a major film. It's based on a truly horrific event, but it kind of ends there. And it's like, okay, if you want to say that, kind of imagine that the ghost of this guy haunts this house in Amityville, Long Island, go ahead. But when you start trying to say, no, this really, this really happened to this family there, and there they are. It's all.
And what's going on with the house now? Is it like a tourist attraction, or like what?
Yeah, I don't. I don't have an update. I think what happened is the house sold afterward, and of course the couple that moved in afterwards said they saw no indication of anything out of the ordinary or abnormal.
Yeah.
So I think it probably continues. It might be as a resident, but somebody figured out that at least for a while, you could get people. You can make it a tourist attraction. And yeah, I think they, the original couple, George and Kathy Lutz, they were interviewed on TV and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, right. It's just but apparently when they got into it,
they really just wanted that famous person.
Yeah, when they got in front of a judge and they're trying to argue who owned the rights to what, the judge's comment is, well, this is all just utter fiction. So, and even if you claim that it was based on something real, nobody can claim to own the story because, the story is just a story. And especially if you want to claim it based on things that happened, well, then it's anybody can talk about it who wants to. Right.
That's very interesting.
I think that's been the appeal of a bunch of, and the thing is in this, the modern horror film, there are examples of things that are based on genuine events, but usually the film or the book that come out as a result of this are wildly separated from them. For example, Jaws is based on what really happened at the New Jersey shore in 1916, but
right.
The movie's not about that, really. All the movie's about only idea is there's a shark.
Right. The movie doesn't claim to be about that. But yeah, but that was like a bull shark, right? That was in like the right. kind of riverbed part of the ocean.
Yeah, that it was because it was able to survive in fresh water.
Or brackish.
It killed killed two swimmers, and then it killed two kids that were in like a canal or something. Yeah. So that's the idea of it, panic and so forth. But obviously Jaws isn't based on what happened at the Jersey Shore in 1916 any more than Psycho or Texas Chainsaw Massacre are based on the real Ed Gein. No, I mean, his horrific enough as it is. Even he shows up even again in Silence of the Lambs. I mean, he's an archetypal figure. Oh, but nobody's claiming that these films are really based on the true history, which is grim enough as it is. But it's like I think James mentioned before. Now we're talking about Halloween. The famous example of the radio play of the War of the Worlds with Orson Welles. Totally fabricated, totally made up, scared the living daylights out of a whole bunch of people.
People were moving out of their homes, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think some of that was overstated, but it was, people were, allegedly packing up their cars and driving away from New Jersey, which is supposedly where the Martians had landed, right? So our home, but it's this idea that you just put a sheet on and go boo, people will be scared, especially if they somehow think it's real,
right. That's that like power of like the telephone game type thing where as people say it, they get more and more elaborate with the storytelling.
Oh yeah, right. That's what I think this was. It's just like once the Lutzes, could get some attention from one supernatural incident, another one showed up. Just to make a comment here about this genre that deals allegedly with the supernatural as though it were real. There's an interesting character who lived about 100 years ago, more or less 90, 100 years ago, who was claimed to be, apparently was, a Roman Catholic priest who specialized in the study of witchcraft and the occult. And he wrote what is probably the definitive book on the subject called A History of Witchcraft. And he wrote several books on vampires. And so he was an influence, I'm sure, on the Dracula and all the rest. I mean, the films anyway. But he made the statement. He said 90% of all the alleged incidents involving the supernatural are false. 90%. Says, but only 90%.
Oh my gosh.
So based on that, you can get in your car and put on your GPS and find 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville.
No, thank you.
Right, I know. It's like like the whole thing about walking through the graveyard kind of thing.
I know. I think it makes me think of that scene in Legend Sleepy Hollow when Ichabod's walking through and every little place is like that's.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that Disney cartoon, that's wonderful. That shows how this all works, because Brom Bones is telling all this fabricated story about the headless horseman freaking out Ichabod Crane. So he's all psyched, that, and any kind of a sound is going to set him off. But I think this is what's the fascination in Halloween, now that he gets bigger and bigger every year. And I think it's.
I mean, it is a lot of fun. I would definitely put it up there in my top holidays.
Yeah, but it gets a little bizarre. I think more than a little bizarre. You get kind of sick stuff, but cannibalism or whatever else.
Oh, well, yeah, I wouldn't go that far. Yeah.
Yeah, all the zombies and whatever. But no, it's Orson Welles described it. He said we just wanted to act like we're hiding behind a bush, and somebody comes walking along, and we jump out and go boo, But when you even at this late date, you listen to that War of the Worlds, it sounds convincing. And allegedly Hitler said, and when he heard about the story, of course being true, Hitler said, he says this shows why the democracies are vulnerable.
That's not creepy at all.
Yeah, it's the whole propaganda thing there. Did a lot
Yeah.
of work on that. But yeah, that's the idea. You create this kind of and certainly Hitler trafficked in the supernatural, and claimed the whole thing with the Jewish world conspiracy was a spiritual plot to take over the world. The Jews sacrificed children and conjured up demons and all this crazy stuff. So it can't be dismissed. People do believe this kind of stuff. A lot of people don't, but there's and Montague Summers thing. Okay, well, you're going to say 10%. How do we know the 10%? And he did. He had a whole bunch of list of all kinds of things.
But Dad, I'm curious though to hear your take though, just in regards to these ideas, how you would really address the supernatural in any sense of the word. I mean, I'm sure you could say the Bible has lots of supernatural things happening within it, and I think that's part of the draw that people have to the idea of supernatural things, whereas with obviously horror films it just goes directly to the slasher gore haunted house stuff. But even you've said C.S. Lewis talking about the veil of the Fae world and things of that nature. I think that there is a real interest in all that, and I don't think that I could fully say that it's completely not real, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on just all of that.
Well, I think, I mean, I think you need to test out whether it really is. And most churches, not just the Roman Catholics, have some kind of a liturgy for exorcism. The churches have never given up on the idea of exorcism. Martin Luther wrote, "And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us." I mean, there is that there. When the disciples can't cast out a demon-possessed boy, there's the biblical example of the exorcist. And Jesus cast him out with no trouble. The disciples then asked Jesus, "Why couldn't we cast out the demon?" Jesus says, "This kind only goes out through prayer." It's sort of a general statement, but is also invoking the name of Christ from the Christian tradition. Exposes all kinds of things. Well, and the whole, the first supernatural American film set in modern day is Dracula. But what's your first exposure to the supernatural in Dracula? It's the power of the cross. You've got Dracula pulling back, and because this this rosary that Renfield has around his neck, falls out with a picture of the cross, and the confrontation with Professor Von Helsing, and this War of Wolfbane, Doctor, no, Count, something far more effective. Pulls out the cross, and they go, okay. I mean, so I think these things are not to be taken lightly. I think you have to look at them, but you need to really verify whether is this schizophrenia, is it trauma, or is it fake, which in most of these cases it was.
Our knowledge of mental illness and all these things has increased vastly since times when it would have just been, oh, they're demon possessed.
Yeah, and you can get a focused church event. And there is, I think every church denomination has some kind of exorcist service or concept or whatever. If you're a Christian, or if you're part of it, or a Jewish or Christian, or even Islamic, you believe the devil is real. And yes, he can be active, but he's not got limitless power. And the devil is more a deceiver than anything else. He'd much rather deceive you than attack you. That goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden.
Right. And I think also it can be a dangerous road where, personal and political agendas can become the reasoning behind this stuff, where you have the witches being burned at the stake when it was really any woman that was like at any point that you just didn't agree with her, or was like single, was getting like kind of burned at the stake to be a witch. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
or like the camps or whatever to convert anyone who is gay, like all that crazy stuff. Like it can get so out of hand so fast.
Yeah.
I feel like it is this mostly the faults of men, and not so much spiritual things.
And something is familiar. We talk about the Salem witch trials, and Arthur Miller's The Crucible, and Donald Trump keeps crying out he's the victim of a witch hunt, and how notorious
Exactly.
that is. But you got to realize, look, in the 1690s when that all occurred, there was a fair sized population in New England, and certainly in Boston. They weren't burning witches. They weren't in hysteria. This was a local event that happened in Salem, and that's why it became so troublesome. Like, these people have all kind of gone off the deep end.
Right.
So
They really did.
Yeah, the idea that you have kind of a paranoia, comes over a community, and remember the Twilight Zone episode of the monsters have landed on Maple Street.
Oh yes,
Where the aliens
everyone
just
gets
do a couple little tricky things,
Yes.
Lights flashing on and off, and next thing you know, the people are all up in arms and fighting with each other. Well,
the blame
that's how these things
just
happen.
happens so quickly. Yeah.
And people learned very early on that if you had a problem with a woman, whether it's your wife or your lover or somebody who was quote out to get you, denounce them as a witch. Right? That you see that in the Wizard of Oz. It's
I know, and I feel like the perfect example of all that witchcraft was Monty Python, where it's like if she sinks, she's a witch. If she floats, she's a witch. Or like if she sinks, she's not a witch, but she's dead.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's
That was it. If she floats, she's clearly a demon. Take her to the stake. If she dies,
she's
at least she's not a witch. Right?
it's like complete lose scenario.
And that's why we're still talking about the Salem witch. We've been to Salem. What is it? It's a whole touristy thing.
Oh, totally.
Okay? You go to Memphis. It's a whole touristy thing about Elvis and Martin Luther King and the blues and W.C. Handy.
Right.
There are these things that are fascinating. Go see the display of the things removed from the Titanic. And all of that stuff just continues to fascinate us. But the Titanic is a glaring exception. Salem is a glaring exception. These are not the way people live. But Nazism is not an exception. Shows what can happen. And that's the measure for today. That if you start believing things without evidence, and I don't want to get too political here, but I will get political. You're trying to get the election in 2020 was not valid. It was corrupt. It was stolen. It was whatever. And there's no evidence to support that. That's no different than this other stuff. You just believe things because somebody told you them. Then at that point, if you're not working with evidence, you can believe anything, and that gets to be scary.
Right. Well, that's where you have an outcome like the insurrection. You have kind of the monsters on Maple Street kind of mentality.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I think that's all I'm going to say. I think that this whole idea of the supernatural is fascinating, and most of all of it is just made up. It is put on a mask and yell boo on Halloween. Nonetheless, it's real, and the demonic has power. The magicians of Egypt could duplicate the works of Moses up to a certain point. But if Moses could turn the Nile into blood, they could turn the Nile into blood. So it's not to be dismissed, but it's like anything else. It'd be treated with great caution. That would be the summation of it. It's not to be afraid. God rules over all. Yes, the demonic is real. Evil is real. It needs to be. I wouldn't say we should be fearful of it, but it needs to be respected in the sense that we acknowledge it. And I would not want to go to a seance just to see what's going to happen because, okay, 90% are fake, but there's maybe 10% that aren't.
Don't need that 10%. No, thank you. Well, to end it up, I want to quote a T-shirt that you used to wear all the time. That was, "I'm the Christian the devil warned you about."
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Well, very good. So, just to end it out then, thank you so much for tuning in. This is 10 Times the Terror, and I'm Gwen.
And I'm Paul.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to
It's 10 Times the Terror,
the podcast.
One of my favorite films ever. Let's do that one again. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.